Hi, everyone. So I'm Dan Goldman, and today I'm going to be talking with you a bit about dinosaurs. I'm really excited to talk about this just because I've been a dinosaur lover ever since I was a kid, and frankly, I love any excuse I can get to just teach people more about them. So to start, let's ask, what is a dinosaur? So dinosaurs are reptiles. Specifically, they fall into a group of reptiles called archosaurs. So these are made up of crocodilians, pterosaurs, dinosaurs, and birds. Uh, Within that, they're sort of divided up into two groups. There's pseudosuchia, which are the animals that are more closely related to crocodiles than birds, and ornithosuchia, more closely related to birds than dinosaurs. Um, so another sort of distinction within dinosaurs themselves is ornithischian, which is bird-hipped, and saurischian, which is lizard-hipped. I'll come back to this a little bit later, but it's just something to keep in mind because this is like one of the central sort of divisions between like the Um, Dinosaurs had relatively light bones, so these were filled with air sacs a lot of the time. Uh, Many dinosaurs were warm-blooded, while others may have been cold-blooded. There's still a lot of debate about the exact nature of dinosaur metabolism. I personally tend to lean more towards the side of warm-blooded, but there have been arguments about the ability of dinosaurs to grow to such massive size as warm-blooded animals with that kind of metabolism. Um, and then finally, dinosaurs' tails were generally used for balance. So they often had some sort of stiff tendons within them to keep them upright. So you weren't going to see dinosaurs that were dragging their tails along the ground. Instead, their tail would have acted as a counterweight to help keep them upright. So some things that may seem to be dinosaurs but aren't are things like Dimetrodon here on the left. This is actually a synapsid, which are a group of animals that are sort of uh, progenitors to mammals. So it actually might be more closely related to us than it is to dinosaurs. Any marine reptiles are not dinosaurs. They split off. Their last common ancestor is from a time before the first animal that could be considered a true dinosaur appeared. And then, as I mentioned before, crocodiles, while closely related, are not dinosaurs. They don't have, they don't fall into the ornithischian or saurischian category. They have sort of a different kind of hip. One of the kind of weird things about crocodilians is that a lot of them can have a sprawled gait, but then can rotate their legs to be underneath them and run in a more upright posture. And then finally, pterosaurs. So these are flying reptiles, are not dinosaurs. They are pretty closely related. They're more closely related than anything else shown here, but they also have their last common ancestor is just before sort of the Saurischian and Ornithischian divide appears. Something that is a dinosaur, though, birds. All birds are dinosaurs. They evolved not long after the first dinosaurs appeared. There are three ages or three periods of dinosaurs that I'll go into more depth on later: the Triassic, the Jurassic, and then the Cretaceous. Birds first evolved in the Jurassic, so that's the middle period of dinosaurs. So next time you guys go on a bird walk, you could also refer to it as a dinosaur walk if you want. I think that makes it a lot of fun. Uh, and going forward, when I use the term dinosaur, I'm going to be specifically referring to non-avian dinosaurs. So that means dinosaurs excluding birds. I just want to do this because there are going to be some generalities I make that don't necessarily apply to birds since they are not extinct, and I don't want to cause any confusion. So let's revisit ornithischians and saurischians. So this is basically one of the most defining features of dinosaurs is their hips, specifically saurischians, which means lizard-like hip. And an example of that is a Tyrannosaurus. So for this, they have their pubis bone pointing towards the front of the body. And then ornithischian, which is bird hips, those have their pubis bone pointing back. And an example of this is Solidosaurus. Um, And so I want to kind of talk about the different subgroups of dinosaurs within each of these. So we'll talk about ornithischians first. So these are the dinosaurs who have the pubis bone pointed back, and we've got quite a variety of body plans for ornithischians. They include groups like ceratopsians, ornithopods, stegosaurs, ankylosaurs, and not pictured in this image, but also pachycephalosaurs. So we'll start with ceratopsians. So these are typically large, but there were some small ones too. Mostly four-legged, very rarely two-legged herbivores that had beaked mouths and often a variety of facial features such as crests and horns. Triceratops is probably the most famous example of this, but there are other ones like Styracosaurus, which is what's pictured here, Nasutoceratops, Psittacosaurus, and Protoceratops. And this is just kind of a fun fact. Nasutoceratops' name literally translates to big nose horn face, which is, I think, very endearing. So it's one of my favorites. Ceratopsians first appeared in the Cretaceous period, so that's the final period in the age of dinosaurs, and they were present up until dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago. Next up, we've got our stegosaurs. These are four-legged herbivores that typically had small heads, and then they had high plates or spikes along their backs and tail. Examples of this include the Stegosaurus, of course, Kentrosaurus, which is what's pictured here, Wuerhosaurus, and Chialingosaurus. And I really hope I pronounced those last two right. I've never actually heard them pronounced, so I had to kind of make a guess. These guys first appeared in the Jurassic, and then they survived up through the early Cretaceous period. And kind of a fun fact about Stegosaurus is that the distance between when Stegosaurus lived and when Tyrannosaurus lived is greater than the distance between when Tyrannosaurus lived and today. So that hopefully gives you an idea of just how long the age of dinosaurs truly was. Dinosaurs were around for millions and millions of years. Humans have been around for, in our present form, a couple 100,000. Next up, we have ankylosaurs. So these are four-legged herbivores, again, with armored backs and often spiked or clubbed tails. And then they oftentimes also had spikes along their sides and protecting their neck. These would have been very difficult for any sort of a predator to take down just because of all the armor. So I imagine that they were pretty safe most of the time. Examples of this include Ankylosaurus, Borealopelta, which is what's pictured here, and Minmi paravertebra. The first ankylosaurs appeared in the mid-Jurassic, and they made it all the way through to the end of the Cretaceous. Pachycephalosaurs are another group of ornithopods, and these are bipedal, so they're two-legged as opposed to all of our four-legged ones we were looking at before. These were a bit smaller than the other types we've looked at. They were small to medium size, so some of the bigger ones probably at hip height would have been maybe a human shoulder height or so. And they were defined by the greatly thickened skull bones and sometimes small horns on their head. And the purpose of the thickened skull, there's a number of speculations. It could have been used for combat, could have been used either for like defense from predators or intraspecies combat, fighting over mates. Also, it could have been used for display. As you can see in this picture, it's drawn to be very colorful. One of the downsides of studying extinct animals is you don't know what colors they were. And while I know a lot of popular imagination of dinosaurs tends to go for a lot of browns and grays and greens, it's entirely within reason that dinosaurs would have had more ostentatious coloring like this, especially when we look at modern day birds who also have more colorful designs. Pachycephalosaurs were a little late to the party. They first appeared in the Cretaceous and lived throughout the period all the way to the end. Examples of this include Pachycephalosaurus, Stygimoloch, Dracorex, and Prenocephala. Interestingly, it is debated whether or not Pachycephalosaurus, Stygimoloch, and Dracorex are actually all the same species, just at different developmental stages. That is another sort of thing to take into consideration with studying fossils is it's difficult to determine whether something is a separate species or a different developmental stage. You can't see if they can successfully breed to determine this. So a lot of times animals that seem like they might be separate species are actually just different levels of development. And then our final ornithischians are ornithopods. So this literally means bird feet. These were herbivores that could walk on 2 or 4 legs. Examples included Parasaurolophus, Iguanodon, which is pictured here, Hadrosaurus, and Maiasaurus. This group include hadrosaurs. Within this group are the famous duck-billed dinosaurs. So all duck-bills were ornithopods. They were able to walk on 2 or 4 legs, and they are one of the earliest types of dinosaurs to appear. They showed up in the Triassic, which is the first period of dinosaurs, and made it all the way through to the end of the Cretaceous. So now we're going to talk about saurischians. So these are the lizard-hip dinosaurs. There are only 2 groups within this, but I would argue, especially the second one, theropods, is probably the most diverse group of dinosaurs. So saurischians are made up of sauropods and prosauropods. I'm kind of lumping these together because prosauropods essentially led into sauropods. So sauropods are large 4-legged herbivores with bulky bodies, long necks, and relatively small heads. Prosauropods were similar but smaller in stature, and some were able to walk upright on 2 legs. But that is something that as they grew bigger, they lost the ability to do. Some examples include Diplodocus, which is pictured here, Apatosaurus, Giraffatitan, Brachiosaurus, and Argentinosaurus. Prosauropods lived in the late Triassic, while proper sauropods first appear in the early Jurassic, and they make it all the way through to the end of the Cretaceous. One thing that's kind of interesting is initially sauropods in the Jurassic were much more diverse. There was a much greater number of species, but as they went on into the Cretaceous, there became fewer species of sauropods, but they became much bigger. And the biggest sauropods were also the biggest land animals that have ever been found, and they all lived during the Cretaceous period. Another kind of fun fact about these actually is early paleontologists speculated that because of how massive they were, sauropods had to live in swamps because that was the only way that they could support their weight, was basically living in the water, being partially submerged the entire time, so that way they weren't crushed by gravity. But the fact that dinosaurs have hollow bones helped to kind of determine that sauropods didn't weigh, like they still weighed a lot, but they didn't weigh as much as early paleontologists probably thought. So they were able to support their weight out of the water, so they were not actually living in the water basically their entire lives. And the final group within saurischians, so these are probably the one you've been waiting for, theropods. These are your 2-legged, primarily carnivorous dinosaurs. There were some who were omnivores and even herbivores, but most theropods were predators. This is also the group that had the most prominent feathering out of all the different types of dinosaurs. So you've got some who, as depicted in this picture, might have had a little bit of feathering, and then you have some that would have been completely covered in feathering the way that modern birds are. Examples of theropods include Tyrannosaurus rex, Velociraptor, Gallimimus, Allosaurus, and Dilophosaurus, which is what's pictured here. And all birds, past and present, are theropods, which kind of might beg an interesting question, which is, how are birds part of the lizard-hipped group? And the reason for this is it's a case of convergent evolution. So basically, we had dinosaurs who evolved the bird-like hips earlier, but then modern birds evolved that trait separately from the bird-hip dinosaurs way later down the line. So I want to talk a little bit now about the actual time period that dinosaurs lived in. So the entire age of dinosaurs is known as the Mesozoic era. And as I mentioned, the first period is the Triassic. So this was from 251 million years ago to 200 million years ago. During this time, all of the continents were combined into one supercontinent called Pangaea. This was immediately after the largest mass extinction in Earth's history, the Permian extinction. And it is where we had the first evolution of dinosaurs, mammals, turtles, lizards, and crocodilians. Early dinosaurs were a lot smaller than what would come later. Most of them were theropods or had a theropod-like body plan, so mainly two-legged. You did have some of the ornithopods show up, so those are some of those dinosaurs that could walk on 2 or 4 legs. And then you also had prosauropods, again, able to walk on 2 or 4 legs before they eventually grew too big to do that. And because it followed the Permian extinction, the climate was initially very extreme, but over the course of the Triassic, things mellowed out a bit. After the Triassic, we move into the Jurassic period. So this is the period that Jurassic Park is named after. And this ran from 200 million years ago to 140 million years ago. At this point, Pangaea is breaking up, and it eventually splits into 2 supercontinents, Laurasia in the north and Gondwana in the south. Laurasia is made up of North America, Asia, and Europe, and then Gondwana is Africa, South America, Antarctica, Australia, and the Indian subcontinent. This is where we start to get larger dinosaurs. It's where most of the ornithischians make their first appearance. This is where we get stegosaurs. It's where we get ankylosaurs. And then it's also where we start to get larger sauropods, and with larger prey comes larger predators, so also larger theropods. Again, the climate was initially warm and humid, but it started to cool off a bit by the end of the Jurassic. And that leads us into the final period of dinosaurs, the Cretaceous. So this was from 140 million years ago to 66 million years ago. So that's the point where dinosaurs went extinct. During this time, the continents continue to drift apart, and they begin to resemble their current arrangement more, but it'll still take a few million years for them to get to where they are in the present day. Dinosaurs, birds, and insects continue to diversify. This is where you'll start to see species that more resemble the modern equivalents of birds and insects. This is also where we get the first appearance of flowering plants and grasses. Prior to this, if you were to walk through Jurassic Field, it'd probably be primarily ferns as opposed to grass. The Cretaceous is also the period where dinosaurs became their most diverse and the largest. As I mentioned, this is where we got the biggest sauropods, but it's also where we got the remaining dinosaurs who hadn't appeared yet. So the ceratopsians, the pachycephalosaurs, and new groups within the existing orders. So this is where we get all of the tyrannosaurs. This is where we get raptors. So most of the dinosaurs that you're probably familiar with probably lived in the Cretaceous. This is probably the most well-represented period in the fossil record. During this time, there was high carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, so that resulted in increased global temperatures, something that we are becoming more familiar with today, unfortunately. So now I want to take you guys on a little tour of just what the planet looked like during the age of dinosaurs. So I've got Milwaukee pinned right here, so you'll be able to see what your home city looks like throughout the world as it changes. We're starting in the early Triassic period, so this is before dinosaurs have properly evolved. We've got some of the sort of predecessors to them at this point. And at this point, you can see, if you wanted to, you could take a road trip from Milwaukee over to Africa. It would take you a little while, but probably wouldn't be too inconvenient. But as we start to move, we can see sea levels beginning to rise. We've lost a bit of the Pacific Northwest over here and bits of Western Mexico. Over here, we can see Europe is starting to split apart from Canada a little bit. And then by the late Triassic, at this point, we have dinosaurs that have properly appeared. And we can see that there's now a small strait going between North America and Africa. So if you want to make that road trip, you're now going to have to go all the way down through South America to get there, or take a boat. Sea levels are going to continue to rise as we move into the Jurassic period. You can see that also the continents continue to drift. So Africa and North America are further apart. You can see Europe and Asia are separated. You can actually make out Britain and Ireland pretty distinctly at this point in time as well, which is kind of cool. And meanwhile, down here we've got this is hard to tell, but it's India, Antarctica, and Australia all grouped up down here, kind of separated from South America and Africa. As we go into the late Jurassic, we can see the continents continue to drift apart. North America and South America are no longer quite connected. We've got South America and Africa still pretty locked into each other. Europe and Asia are connected again, but also significant chunks of them are underwater. And then down here, it's still kind of messy, but you can see the Indian subcontinent starting to split off. And then we've got Antarctica and Australia down here, sort of having some new seas arise within them. As we go into the early Cretaceous, North America starts to become more independent. We've still got a lot of higher sea levels around the Gulf of Mexico, and we can start to see South America and Africa beginning to split, as well as once again, Europe and Asia are divided by some rising water. And India has fully separated from the other land masses. It's going to start making its way north until it eventually collides with Asia. As we get to the mid-Cretaceous period, we have some flooding start to happen in North America. So sea levels rise, and chunks of Canada and the United States are going to be submerged underwater. Now, Wisconsin won't quite be submerged. It'll become beachfront property in a few million years. At this point, South America and Africa have also separated. The rising sea levels have also affected them. So you can see that they're divided into pieces by the rising water levels. Similarly, Europe has been very severely flooded. India continues to make its way north. Australia and Antarctica are beginning to separate. We continue through the mid-Cretaceous period. Now we've got water completely going from the North Pole straight through to Mexico. So North America is divided in two. South America and Africa, and basically all the rest of the continents continue to be flooded. And the late Cretaceous, the end of dinosaurs, sea levels have dropped again. So they're not quite as low as they were at the start, but they're a lot lower than they got throughout the Cretaceous period. As you can see, Wisconsin managed to avoid the flooding. So if you were to go back in time to Milwaukee, you would still be able to live there if you could deal with the neighbors. So then I'm going to go back to my presentation. So now the other question is, where are the dinosaurs? What happened to them? Excluding birds, they all went extinct 66 million years ago at the end of the Cretaceous period. A large asteroid crashed into the Chicxulub crater on the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico. When it hit, it was instantly vaporized, and it created a hole in the earth briefly that was 40 kilometers deep before the liquefied rock that was created from the intense energy basically collapsed in on itself and caused the crater to fill in and become much wider. So it wound up being 150 to 200 kilometers across. So to put that in perspective, that's roughly the distance from Milwaukee to Dubuque, Iowa. Everything within a few hundred kilometers of the impact would have been instantly vaporized. So there was no chance of anything surviving. And within a few thousand kilometers, it would have taken a little bit more time, but the intense heat, the shock waves, and resulting tsunamis would have wiped out most life within the first few thousand kilometers of the initial impact. Now, this alone may not have been enough to actually destroy the dinosaurs or make them extinct, but turns out when a giant hunk of rock crashes into the planet, there are going to be lots of side effects. So in the aftermath, after the initial fires, tsunamis, and strong winds had abated, a lot of dust was still kicked up into the air. This resulted in months of the Earth being incredibly cold and incredibly dark. So this results in the death of plant life, and that moves up the food web. So anything that relies on plants is going to start starving. Anything that relies on animals that rely on plants, it's going to start starving. When sunlight returned, the opposite problem began to happen because the asteroid also kicked up a ton of carbon and a ton of water vapor, which basically supercharged the greenhouse effect. So the Earth became intensely hot after sunlight returned, and it became unlivable for pretty much any dinosaur species that had somehow managed to survive through the dark. In addition, there were new natural disasters like acid rain that occurred primarily because of the dust in the atmosphere. So there were actually two types. One was sulfuric acid rain. So that was created from sediment that went up into the air and then came down again. And then there was nitric acid, which was created when the intense heat from the greenhouse effect caused nitrogen to in the air to become unstable. It would separate and fuse with oxygen to create nitrous oxide, and then later fuse with water to become nitric acid. And that would rain down and ruin some dinosaurs' days. So if dinosaurs are extinct, the only way that we're able to study them is through fossils. So fossils are remnants, impressions, or traces of an animal or plant that over time convert to rock. There are three types of fossils. The first is unaltered soft or hard parts. So these are incredibly rare. These would be fossils where we actually can see the tissue of dinosaurs or other animals that have been fossilized. Notable examples of this from more recent fossils include woolly mammoths that have been found in bogs, or a lot of animals that have been found in the La Brea tar pits in Los Angeles. Unfortunately, these are incredibly rare because the conditions for them have to be just right. In order for it to preserve, it has to be rapid burial before bacterial decay can occur in an oxygen-free environment with low energy sediment. So amber and tar are two examples of where this can happen. When you hear the term fossil, what you probably think of immediately are altered hard parts. So that'll be fossilized bones primarily, or perhaps horns and nails. So on the lower picture here, we've got a picture of Sue, which is perhaps the most famous fossil on Earth. It is the most complete Tyrannosaurus Rex ever found. And if you ever want to see it, it's in the Chicago Field Museum. I highly recommend it. It's very cool. So these fossils are formed when bones basically become petrified in the earth and get converted into rock. So we're not handling animal bones, we're handling rocks that took their place. And the final kind of fossil, and probably the most overlooked, are trace fossils. So these are fossils that are remnants of animal behavior rather than the animals themselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. There is some bias in the fossil records. So large animals with big bones are more likely to be fossilized than smaller animals whose bones might be drifted apart more easily by things like the wind or other animals. So as a result, we have a lot more knowledge about a lot of the big dinosaurs, and there may be small dinosaurs that we'll never know about because there weren't any fossilized examples of them. So trace fossils are, as I said, basically indicators of behavior. So these can take a lot of different forms. They could be footprints, they could be bite marks, skin impressions, or even fossilized poop. And these are just as valuable as the actual bones because they give us more information about how these animals behave. So for instance, footprints can tell us about how an animal moved. If we see a Triceratops's footprints, we might be able to learn if they could walk, if they could trot, or if they were actually able to fully run, depending on the gait of the footprints we find. Skin impressions reveal skin texture, so we can learn more about dinosaurs that were scaly, what their skin might have looked like. It's also how we learn about dinosaurs that were feathered. We found a lot of impressions of feathers, and there have been occasional finds of actual dinosaur feathers that were fossilized, I believe. And then fossilized poop, which is called a coprolite. And fun fact, you can actually buy this at the Science Museum in St. Paul. These can reveal information about what dinosaurs ate. So these can tell us about a carnivore, like we might find other bones of other animals in there, or bones of an animal of the same species, which can teach us that maybe certain species engaged in cannibalism. Similarly, there's also scarring that we can find in bones. So these could be incident or indications of past fights.
Yeah, and I don't think we can hear you. I don't know if maybe our headset came unplugged or something.
Yeah, I'm not hearing them either.
So all right, so we're going to pick back up again on fossils. So these are remnants, impressions, or traces of an animal or plant that over time get converted to rock. There are three types of fossils. We have unaltered, soft, or hard parts. So these are when you're actually able to find preserved tissue of an animal. This is incredibly rare, doesn't happen very often, just because the conditions for it are so difficult to achieve. It requires rapid burial before bacterial decay can occur, and it needs to be in an oxygen-free environment with low energy sedimentary surroundings. So amber and tar are good examples of this. We have actually found some dinosaur soft tissues. For instance, we were able to find some blood vessels from a T-Rex bone when it was cut open. But again, this is very rare. It's the exception, not the rule. When you think of fossils, you probably think of altered hard parts. So these are preserved bones of animals. So this means that the bones get petrified and turned into rock, essentially. So that's what we're looking at when we look at dinosaur skeletons in a museum. Below here, we've got a picture of Sue, which is the most complete T-Rex ever discovered. It's on display in the Chicago Field Museum, and it's definitely something that's worth seeing. And then the final kind of fossil are trace fossils. So these are evidence of behavior rather than the actual animals themselves. And I'll talk a little bit more about those on the next slide. Remains of large boned animals are most easily preserved. So unfortunately, there's bias in the fossil record that I will also discuss in a little bit. To go into more detail about trace fossils, trace fossils can take a number of forms. They can be footprints, bite marks, skin impressions, or even fossilized poop. And these can teach us a lot about how animals acted when they were alive. So these are just as valuable as finding hard altered fossils. For instance, footprints might be able to tell us about how an animal walked or whether it was able to trot or run. We can learn from skin impressions about the texture of their skin. This is how we found out that some dinosaurs had feathers. And poop, which is fossilized, is called a coprolite, can reveal information about what dinosaurs ate. So in a carnivore, you might be able to find bones of another member of its species that might indicate cannibalism. In herbivores, you might be able to find leftovers of remains of plants to determine what kind of plants certain animals ate. And then scarring in bones can be evidence of past trauma. So a Triceratops might have tooth marks from a fight with a T-Rex, or it could have puncture wounds from a fight with another Triceratops. There is bias in the fossil record. So big animals are more likely to be preserved just because they have larger bones that are less likely to be rapidly decayed or to be scattered apart. Fossilization depends very much on specific conditions. So this brings me to some bad news that unfortunately dinosaur fossils have never been found in Wisconsin. It's one of several states where this is the case. Florida is another one, and Hawaii, because both of them were underwater throughout the Mesozoic era. But then there are also states like New Hampshire and Maine where dinosaurs just haven't been found. The likely reason for this is because there were dinosaurs in this area. As you saw when we were looking through the world map, Wisconsin was above water level or above sea level throughout the Mesozoic era. So there were probably dinosaurs living there, but it's more that the fossils that were left behind probably got destroyed largely by things like erosion, glaciers, which Wisconsin certainly and most of the Midwest certainly has had enough of, flooding or human interference. So the lack of fossils in Wisconsin, I don't want you to take as meaning that there weren't dinosaurs. It just means that we don't have evidence of it yet. And then one final thought is, I know a lot of people want to know, like, is there any chance we could ever have dinosaurs walk the earth again? So is Jurassic Park possible, basically? And the short answer is no. At least not how they do it in the movie. In Jurassic Park, the way that they get dinosaur DNA is by extracting dinosaur blood from amber and then using that to clone them. This wouldn't work for a variety of reasons. The main one being that DNA has a half-life of about 500,000 years. So dinosaurs have been dead for at least 66 million years ago. So even the most recent dinosaurs wouldn't have anywhere near enough usable DNA to try and make any sort of a clone of them. But paleontologist Jack Horner has proposed that we could genetically modify present-day birds to bring out their ancestral dinosaur traits, which could allow for modern-day conceptions of dinosaurs. These would not be true to the actual dinosaurs that lived because we don't have the information about exactly what they are like. We don't have their genetics, and we have only pieces of how they lived and what they looked like. But it's the closest that modern science is able to get us. I have a few books that I just wanted to shout out, and I gave this list to Maggie, Amanda, and Tim to send out to everyone as well. Some nonfiction books that I really recommend. The top two, Dinosaurs, the Grand Tour, and Dinosaurs in Prehistoric Life, were very helpful for me putting this presentation together. T-Rex and the Crater of Doom is a really good, it's the book that basically popularized the asteroid extinction theory. And then Dinosaurs Without Fossils is a really great book about trace fossils. And The Rise and Fall of the Dinosaurs is sort of a good introduction to dinosaurs. Like it's written as a more popular science type of book, so it's more accessible for people who don't have a ton of knowledge about dinosaurs going in. And then some fun fiction as well. Day and the Dinosaur and Time Flies are both good picture books for kids. And then for older kids or adults, we've got Arthur Conan Doyle's The Lost World, Rivers of Time, and of course, Jurassic Park and its sequel, also called The Lost World. And with that, I will take questions.